Jesse is missing his opportunity to hear instruction about what it is that he needs to do going forward. Later, I think towards the middle, Sammy tries to get Jesse to think about, okay, have a plan just before you decide to leave. And Jesse doesn't want to have a plan. And Jesse reminds me a little bit of me. All these people trying to tell you something to do, and you just, bullheaded and going to do whatever it is you're going to do. And then 10 years down the road, it catches up to you. That decision making that you did has a way of catching up to you. So burning the college brochure is really just very unproductive. It's almost like he's trying to burn it out of his head. But then you think about these flames and the smoke that is emitted from burning the college brochure, and you think about the opening of the movie with Brian pouring gasoline into a car and setting it afire, and then you think about Brian sitting in the car as an older individual and smoking and letting the smoke fill the air. And so now you see Jesse setting something afire. So he's setting his future afire. He's setting any opportunity of fire, any possibility of fire. It doesn't matter. He reading the brochure is not enough. Going to the place. Sometimes you have to put yourself into the place. When you're trying to overcome setback and you have a vision of yourself of going forward and being in a place, you go to that place. It's something that I tell my students. If I teach at the community college level, and so I tell students, whatever institution that you want to transfer to, go to that place. Go and sit on the benches. Go and walk among the other students. Sit in one of the classes, get permission. Sit in because if you position yourself in that environment, it will encourage you. And so for Jesse to not even do that, just not hear instruction at all, miss the opportunities, the multiple opportunities that even Sammy was trying to show him, but even his mother is not productive in life. She is a visual representation of perpetual setback. She's not going to move forward. And it might have to take Jesse leaving, which we will also see, for her to move forward, because how is she going to make any money? And but she still continues to make money in the most popular way there is. And there's that Cancer Society donation. I thought it was interesting that Justin Donnelly, the director, gave us a frame of that. And right after this, we see Brian sitting on the couch looking at the game to see if those numbers confirm, and to see if the $500 that he invested, or $300 $500 because he had to pay the guy back later. $500 he invested, that he got a return on his investment. And so, return on investment is a very interesting thing to think about, because we think that if we give these donations, there is a return on our investment. Well, you have the ego boost of being a wealthy person and being able to send a $25,000 check, and being able to tell people and feel the social validation. I mean, you are already socially validated with the house you have or the job you have, and the fact that the wife doesn't have to work and she can take care of the kids all day, right? But then you have the validation of just, being able to do that, being able to give that kind of money to somebody. But the Cancer Society doesn't really invest in you back. Not really. Not technically. The money that you give is for other people. So that if you get on financial hard times, you couldn't call the Cancer Society to tell them to give you back your donation because you got to pay your rent or your mortgage. And it was very wise of Brian to have an investment portfolio for money that was easily, attainable if something happened. But he's preoccupied throughout the whole movie with this donation. Like, it is the biggest push for him to get the money enough to pay this donation versus be motivated to get money to pay beyond this donation or pay beyond any other types of investment. And so he's sitting on a couch. He finds out that the team won, and then he goes back to the bar to see Jimmy. So he's back at the bar. Jimmy gives him his return of $5,000. He's interestingly in a light suit again. And I don't remember if he had gone to an interview or anything like that, but he's in a light suit again. So that lets you know that he's happy with the money that he has. He's not as depressed, right? There's a smile on his face. There's a lot of less stress. Jimmy feels all right about himself, you know. They engage in conversation. So the conversation that they engage in is Jimmy now propositioning. That's the word I want to use, propositioning, because we have one of the themes is prostitution that Jesse talks about, and he doesn't refer to his mother as prostituting, but he uses the term prostitution when he's speaking with Sammy out there in the field. So now that Jimmy has baited Brian in this small little deal of turning 500 to 5,000, he now wants to hook him. And so he tells Brian about this deal that he has that requires a $100,000 investment. And Brian is basically saying, I can't really afford something like that. And when I look at this and I parallel this to the two teens, it is always one person in a relationship who gets you into something. And sometimes they get you into something by telling you what it is, not necessarily the full consequences of that decision, but enough just to tell you that it's not going to be all that good, right? Or they will get you into something and you don't know what it is, and then you find yourself in it. And Jimmy and Jesse remind me of that dynamic. I have a cousin like that who used to get me into a lot of stuff when I was young. And when I reflect on that at 46 years old today, and today's day is April 27, 2021. When I think about that, I should be dead. I should have been sex trafficked. I should have been in jail or something, because the types of stuff that she got me into, they were just really dangerous. And that was back in like 90s or something, 80s, 90s. Now, fast forward to your 21st century, there's a lot more to get into. But Brian says he can't afford it right now, but Jimmy keeps working him. The thing about Setback in this two-party dynamic is that if you say that you cannot afford something right now, say it and walk away. It's what I hear men often say. Say what you mean what you say. So if you can't really afford it, take the $5,000 and walk away. Because you already know that you have money coming from the financial portfolio. You talk to your banker. So you just needed maybe like some upfront cash or something like that. I don't even think he needed that. He just got swept up in what Jimmy was talking about. And so he went on ahead and just, did it for fun. But now Jimmy is coming up with this drug deal that's going to be $100,000. And he's promising, here's what the guarantee is. He's guaranteeing that he can triple his money, turn $100,000 into $300,000. And even Brian is shocked by that. It's that, so you're now guaranteeing it? It doesn't make any sense. Now, how can you guarantee? But Brian doesn't do enough self-reflecting, or he doesn't do enough challenging Jimmy's argument. Jimmy is making an argument. Brian puts forth a very quick counter argument, but he doesn't stay with the counter argument. He doesn't think about the logic of what Jimmy is saying. In some ways, Brian just continues to push himself in his own setback, because nobody can guarantee 100,000 to 300,000. It doesn't make any sense, right? And especially Jimmy is no real professional. So where is he going to get $300,000? And if he did, he wouldn't give it to Brian. He would take that money himself. And it's not like they're in the same profession. It's not like they know the same people for Brian to make sure that he gets his 300,000. So Brian, in this argument, what you see here is an argument. I teach the building blocks of argument. And so what you see here is an argument that Jimmy is making. He's making a claim that he can give, if Brian invests $100,000, that he could give him a return of $300. That's his claim, right? Brian has said, well, how can you guarantee that? That's it's a counterclaim, and it is a strong claim at the beginning, but he doesn't stick with his own counterclaim, and he doesn't get to a rebuttal that puts the conversation to a halt. So Jimmy gets into the evidence that, I know this particular drug deal, importing, exporting, right? And he talks as if he's very sure of himself. But if Brian has stuck with his initial counterclaim, how can you guarantee? It would have revealed itself that Jimmy doesn't know what he's really doing, and that he's talking out the side of his butt. So Brian ends up giving him the 100,000 that we're going to see later, and that means that Jimmy won the argument. If you think about life in the same way as a boxer, two boxers in a ring, and you think about life as an argument, and the boxers representing life, right? And one boxer makes a hit, that's your claim. Another boxer makes a hit, that's the counterclaim. And then they go back and forth, and then they begin to pull out skills to try to get that opponent down. That's, supporting evidence, right? But until you make sure that you hit that boxer to the point that he doesn't get up again, you're going to keep going back and forth, rounds. But that one punch that you make should knock that boxer down, or that one argument that you make, or your rebuttal that you make, should knock that opponent down to the point he can't get back up. And so Brian is allowing Jimmy to basically knock him around. He's not putting up any real effort at defending himself. It doesn't become clear that he's trying to defend himself until later, when Jimmy can't produce the money. And it's not Jimmy's fault. We'll find out later, but he can't produce it. And so something in Brian wakes him up to the point that he gets violent, and there are consequences to his actions. So there's a flashback while he's standing and talking to Jimmy. This flashback to his childhood bankruptcy court still plagues his mind. He still thinks about this. And this lets you know that he never really recovered from this. That even if you go and make a success of yourself and do well in areas and get a good house or something like that, that there are some issues in your past that can really bother you, that can really plague you. No matter what you try to do, it won't leave you alone. And this is something that if he has to continue flashbacking or reminding himself of this bankruptcy court situation that affected his childhood, and allowing it to sort of permeate every decision that he makes, it's a problem, because he's going to make the wrong decisions based upon this visual in his head. And even if he was a child and he didn't understand bankruptcy court, it was still, the environment in the car was still so bad to the point that he took it in and he felt it. It wouldn't become until later in life that he realized what the bankruptcy court was about and how much of an importance it was, and how it affected his decision making later. But even now, I don't think he's reflecting on it. I think he's reflecting on the fact that he doesn't want to lose his family, or he just doesn't want to go through bankruptcy. Who wants to go through bankruptcy, right? In some cases, you can sort of get out of debt, right? But then there are other cases where you just have to process out. So this is a flashback to his time that we keep seeing throughout the movie. So now we shift the narrative to drug dealing, because remember, Jimmy is a door. Like many people, Jimmy is a door. This is basically what Jimmy gets Brian into, which is the drug smuggling, right? So we're at the airplane hangar, and we're going to see this scene again at the end of the movie. We're at this airplane hangar. We see the drugs that are wrapped up, and we don't have much more than them just working this particular scene. But this is what Jimmy has gotten Brian into, but it is also where Brian has got himself into, that the choices we make, we can't choose the consequences. We can make the choice, but we don't know what the consequences are. This is no minor drug deal that Jimmy has gotten Brian into. This is a major enterprise. And so there's a hierarchy here, and there are consequences that could lead to death. And so this setback that Jimmy has entered and perpetuated throughout the movie is about to net him the wrong result. So Jesse decides to leave. Mom again is entertaining a guest. And Jesse had already had some money, so now he's, from all of the cards he's jacked, or however way he has gotten money. So now he has some kind of sympathy for his mother, some kind of honor for her to leave her some money on the table. Hopefully she'll wake up before the man wakes up. And the way they are lying on the couch, she's likely to wake up before he does. But it's something, though, for a son who cares about his mother, who still, sort of despises her and her choices, to still care enough to leave her some money so that she can get by, she can pay the rent, etc. So Brian has agreed to the deal with Jimmy. So his contact is Jimmy. Brian doesn't know anybody else. That this is very crucial. It's extremely crucial to pay attention to this idea. Brian doesn't know the enterprise. Brian doesn't know the drop-off locations other than this money that he's given to Jimmy for investing. Brian doesn't know anything about the enterprise that he's about to engage in. Also, look at his outfit, his clothing choices. He's wearing jeans. He's wearing a white shirt, collared shirt, that same gray jacket, but it's not paired with the gray slacks. Looks like he's wearing some dress shoes, but he's carrying the briefcase with $100,000 in it. There's also another thing I want you to know before we get into the next frame, is that Jesse says later in the movie, why do I get myself into these things? That's important to consider in the context of not knowing your enemy, not knowing what you are doing. And then Brian says to Jimmy later, when he discovers that, you know, Jimmy doesn't have the money and they're basically, you know, the deal is botched. Brian says, how do you give money to somebody you don't know? How do you get into business with somebody you don't know? Now, isn't it irony? Because here it is, Brian is doing exactly the thing that you see Jesse say, and you see him saying with Jimmy. And this runs a little counter to who Brian is. If I can just add another note. Now, he was the director of sales. Well, before you can sell somebody anything, you know your client. And in some ways, Brian is acting like a client who just gives over his money. But Brian also has a knowledge set that that reveals, and he doesn't really tell us that. We have to fill in the gaps. If he's a director of sales, that means he met sales quotas, he had good numbers. That also means that he had to learn his customer, learn the business, make those sales as well. So he comes with a knowledge set and skill for sales. So that means that if he's engaging in any kind of business venture, whatever it is, a drug deal or any other type of venture, why isn't he doing research? He's only relying on Jimmy. And Jimmy, yes, Jimmy owns a business according to Jimmy, but has Jimmy revealed to Brian his business savvy, his business ownership? Jimmy is found behind a bar pouring drinks. And usually the person who owns a business hires a bartender to pour drinks. They don't usually pour the drinks. They are usually in the office somewhere. And so that's something to think about too. So when Brian initially comes into the office, into the bar, why is his first point of contact Jimmy and not a regular bartender if Jimmy is the owner of the bar? So it's all types of distractions. There are so many ways that you can go at this in terms of thinking about this, but just to leave you with this idea, why are you getting into something that you have no idea about, that you don't know the system of? You have never engaged this market. If you are a sales guy, you have never engaged the drug dealing market. So why are you not researching it before you get it? So this continues the setback. It perpetuates the initial setback and just keeps him in setback to the point that he just has no other energy but to keep going in the thing that he's going in. So we are now back into the narrative of the two teens, remember? And Sammy is questioning Jesse's desire to leave, right? And he's asking him where he's going to go, how he's going to get around, things like that. And Jesse doesn't give him a really straight answer other than, he'll find his way. And Sammy is basically suggesting that's not a plan. And Jesse is going to hear that again towards the end of the movie, that's not a plan. This is contrasted to the hastiness of Jesse to leave without a plan is no different than the hastiness of Brian to try to get out of his setback without a true plan, right? But this is contrasted with the idea that Brian does think he has a plan, even though it's not a true plan. Getting into the drug dealing and drug smuggling is not a plan. It's a momentary, hasty decision that's going to net you the wrong results. But you can also look at Jesse's desire to just run away as also hasty, because he doesn't have any skills, you know. He's refusing to go to community college. He thinks it's lower than his ability, right? And he has no other skill other than to know how to drive, right? So maybe if he went to truck driving school or something like that, he could do that, but he has no other skills. So why run away if you don't have anything? But the irony is that Brian actually has a skill. He has a marketing and sales skill, and he's not using that skill. That it's interesting that we can have gifts and talents that are adjacent or are housed within us, and given any context where we are pressed, using that term from the movie, we don't use those skills. So that creates an automatic setback because you're not operating in what you know you can do. You have Brian knows how to sell, but Jimmy is the one who ends up selling Brian, right? Jesse knows how to drive, but Sammy here ends up driving Jesse, because we're going to see later that it is Sammy who always criticizes Jesse about jacking cars. Sammy is the one who initiates the jacking of Jimmy's car that they discover, and that leads them down the wrong road, right? So a plan does matter. That if you have a plan, how many times have you heard this? That if you don't plan your life, someone will plan it for you, right? If you don't have something set out, you know, at least set up appointments or at least enroll in college, because then it gives you something to think about before you get into something else. So Jesse, for the first time, says that he doesn't want to jack the car or jack a car to leave town, because he says he wants to leave clean. Because remember, it's Jesse who says that the city is flatlining, right? And so in some ways, he may not want to be a participant of the city flatlining. So if he's going to leave it behind, he wants to leave it clean. So now we're back in the bar, and Brian is now showing the money that he has brought. The irony is it's in a work briefcase. Interesting enough, these are work areas that you would usually store things in. So I wonder if that's the same briefcase. I'm quite sure it is. It's the same briefcase when he is laid off and he's walking towards his car with the box. That briefcase that was a work briefcase where he worked clean, in the same way that Jesse wants to leave the city clean. He worked clean. Brian worked clean. Now he's working unclean, right? Now he's working in a criminal enterprise. So he's using a work briefcase to solve his setback, in a sense, with money in it. You know, it's interesting too how we trust people. Brian has no other history other than knowing Jimmy from the high school they were in the 90s. He has no history other than that. Just that one encounter in their young adulthood, and he's giving $100,000. Now it's an investment, as they call it, but he's giving over 100. That's all he has. $100,000. I cannot stress that enough. $100,000 for somebody he doesn't know, for some drug dealer he doesn't know, for some system he hasn't learned about or researched, and he's giving $100,000. So it's interesting that he's on the client end, and I wonder how many times he has tried to sell a customer on this very idea, to fork over that kind of money, and the customer still doesn't understand what they are investing in. This is a very interesting dynamic here. A very interesting visual. There is some reluctance on his part in terms of him lowering his head, but where is his strength as an individual? You know, you lose your job and it knocks you down a peg, and you scramble to try to find something else. Where I have to applaud Brian, and I've noted this in previous slides, was that he made sure to save enough money for hard times. But now he's giving over his money during hard times, and he's not investing in the right context. So this is going to be very interesting. All right, so this is where the two guys are talking about still Jesse leaving, and Sammy being bothered by it, and it is really here where he's talking about that's not a plan. But I thought this visual here was interesting, because I could have just stayed with the previous visual. But I thought this was, because this is sort of like two young men, the two hopes of young men against the backdrop of semi-destruction or something, or chaos, or however way you want to look at this visual. This is the hope of two young men, and they are making bad decisions from their young adulthood. And no, they haven't been caught stealing cars yet, but they end up stealing a car that leads to a botched drug deal, and they end up having money that belongs to the wrong people, and they go on shopping sprees. They do a number of things that you just shake your head. And I wonder, looking at this backdrop, how many dreams were started, and didn't finish. That looks like, towards the right of the frame, that looks like a house or something. And then you see other items spread out and just turned over, and the weeds have grown, and this reminds you of your dream. If you don't tend to your dream, that one aspect of setback could be you not tending to your own dream, and that eventually is going to work against you, because you are allowing too many distractions, you are allowing too many weeds. We call it in the Bible the tares. And when it comes time for you to try to get your life back, you have so many areas of your life that you're going to have to resolve and self-reflect on and think about. And if you look at each of these areas within this frame, it's so much that you have to do. That's why it's just better to mow the lawn. It's better to throw things out when you need to throw things out. It's better to manage what you have, because when you don't do that, it places you in setback, and then you have to build from setback. And when you are building from setback, it could take longer because of so much stuff you have surrounded yourself with. So there's that stare again that I hate. Brian has given him the money for investment, and later when Brian leaves, Jimmy is going to go out and back to behind the trash dumpster, and he's going to pull out a bag of drug product. And he didn't actually he didn't show Brian this. This is interesting. I didn't think about it until now. He didn't tell Brian about the drugs that he was hiding at the back. And then when he gets on the phone, he's going to talk to somebody and say, you know, I got the investment that you want. So I wonder then if he had planned to deceive Brian the whole time, that he never intended to give him the $300K. And I said that earlier, that if you get $300K out of $100,000, why would you even give that to somebody, especially if you're a con person, right? If you're a con man. So that stare bothers me, because that stare tells me there's some sort of ulterior motive that he has, that he hasn't been as forthcoming. And we see that when he goes behind the truck, a trash dumpster, and retrieves a bag with drugs in it, and that's when he hears his car start. So the guys are still talking, and this is Sammy right here pulling at Jesse to steal a car for one last time, because he feels like Jesse is serious about leaving. But I interpret this scene a little differently. I interpret Sammy not wanting his friend to leave. And so that he's using the carjacking that they've always done as a way to, I guess, re-encourage him in a strange way, re-encourage him so that he won't leave. Because when they discover the money in the car, they end up returning to Jesse's house. So I interpret this because they have grown up together. Sammy doesn't want his friend to go. And so this is a different type of interpretation that I feel is going on. So we have Jimmy on the phone talking about how he's got the investment. So that means he didn't have any money. Oh, that's so interesting. That he's supposed to be the bar owner, right? So why doesn't he have already $100,000? Why does he need Brian's money as an investment? Because this confirms my assumption that Jimmy doesn't have anything. Jimmy is not made. I don't think that's Jimmy's bar, because on the phone here, he's saying to the person who's on the other end of the phone, I got the investment money. I got the investment. And then he's basically saying, I'm going to leave it in the car for you to pick up. And this is him actually putting it in the car. And you can tell this is not his money, meaning that it didn't come from his work ethic or whatever, because who leaves $100,000 in the car? Why can't the guy just come into the bar and get the briefcase? Because if the bar belongs to Jimmy, then he could take whomever back there to his office, and we never see him in his office. Isn't that strange? We never see him we always see him bartending, and we never see him in his office. When they make the exchange, Brian and Jimmy, they're doing it at a booth table that customers sit at. So why in the world should we believe that this bar is really that bar is not Jimmy's? I think Jimmy set Brian as a mark, because he knew he had some kind of money. He knew he had like a fancy suit on or something. So he knew he had something, and he thought about it, and he figured out a way to work them, right? Bait, hook, and switch. So this is him putting the money in the car, because if you work for that yourself, you're not going to put it in the car and not stand there and watch. Otherwise, you just have the person come into the bar if it is your bar. I don't think it was. I don't think it is. So now here's where the narrative shifts. Truly shifts. I mean, we have the going back and forth that Justin Donnelly does, who is a director, does with the different narratives, right? The 3 different types of narratives. But this is where things turn really deadly, because these 2 boys are now going to come upon the car that Jimmy just put money into, and they're going to jack the car because they are working with their skill set, right? It's a bad skill set, but they're working from their habit. And so, and anytime they see something that they feel that they can jack, it's a trigger for them. So they're not really bothered by the fact that it's a nice car, and they weren't bothered. They weren't bothered by the big truck that they, jacked. So this is where the narrative is actually going to shift, where it's going to send everybody into a frenzy, leading to, deadly consequences. So Brian is walking in a park. Just before he gets to this part, there's a lot of animation and play between the family members, and it gets him to thinking, and so he turns and looks back at them. And don't forget, he's always looking backward, right? He's remembering his own childhood, his own upbringing. He has flashbacks to when he was in the car. And so the horsing around with the family really moves him. And then he gets a call from Jimmy. So the guys run into a snag in their jacking exercise, right? The car has a flat tire. There's some irony in this situation. Sammy is saying we need to fix the tire, okay? Jimmy is saying it really doesn't matter, we'll just leave it here. Jimmy keeps his same refrain, he doesn't take responsibility, but Sammy is all of a sudden the one who initiates and says let's steal a car, is the one who's now saying let's be responsible and fix the tire. It's weird how they reveal their character, how they reveal their ethical thinking, their morality. In all other instances, all they did was jack the car, drive it to some sort of abandoned area, strip it, whatever things they could do with it, right? And then walk away. But now all of a sudden, Sammy wants to fix it. He wants to fix. So he's basically saying, let's fix the setback. The setback for them after jacking the car is the tire blowing out on them. So the car that they jacked is of no longer use, but Sammy is trying to make it of use because he feels like there's some purpose. And another irony is that he doesn't really want his friend to leave, Jesse, but in wanting to fix the car, if they fix the tire, Jesse will leave. So they're all mixed up in their thinking about the decisions that they make. But I thought it was interesting that they're wanting to fix the setback. The immediate setback is the tire blowing out, and they want to fix it. And this is the same car that they just jacked. So going back to the narrative with Jimmy, the person in the truck right here across the way is actually part of the drug dealing scheme or something like that. And they were tied to, if the kids hadn't jacked the car, they were going to pick up the money from the car. So this is becoming a little ominous because there's somebody watching Jimmy. So now the movie is pushing a sort of urgency, pushing a sort of pressing. Now Jimmy is pressed. The two teens are not necessarily pressed. They may be annoyed, but they're not really pressed yet. But Jimmy is pressed because he doesn't have the money that he claimed that he had. So this is where the discovery of the money, Sammy discovers it first because it is a briefcase. And so you often want to open up whatever it is that, you see is available for you to open. So he discovers the money, and then he calls over Jesse to look at the money. Okay. Brian is now returning from, that field, I mean, that little play area that he was walking from. He's also kind of bothered by this idea of Jimmy not coming clean with him concerning the drug deal. He just seemed kind of weird in his discussion with him. And so that prompts Brian to go home. Well, when he goes home, his car is repossessed. So now begins truly his pressing. I'm not quite sure that he was pressed when he lost his job. I'm not quite sure that he was pressed with the 25,000, donation, because you got to know that you are really in a bad predicament, to me, for you to feel pressed. I think that was pre-pressing or problems or something like that. But the car being repossessed, something that you value being repossessed. And it's interesting, I don't feel like he was all that pressed when he gave over the $100,000. If he was pressed about that, he would never have returned to the bar. Jimmy didn't know where he lived, right? And he's not working on a job, so and he doesn't have to go to that bar anymore. But if he was truly pressed about that, he would never have gone to the bar. So I think that's all sort of pre-processing of something, right? Pre-pressing. But coming home and finding your car repossessed and a note on your door, that begins, to me, his real pressing, because now he can't get around like he needs to get around, and that perpetuates further his setback. So the boys return home. So remember, it was Jesse who has the bag and he wants to leave. He's in a green coat. But Sammy's decision to jack the car, and they end up jacking the wrong car and finding money in the car, has caused Jesse to return. Remember, Jesse wants to leave. He wants to leave because he doesn't want to be part of the flatlining of the city. But now he's returning back to the same environment, context that he feels weighs him down, that doesn't give him a smile. Sure, he got money and it's not his money, but that lets you know this supports the claim that he did not have a plan. So there's this going back and forth about the money and how they shouldn't spend it or something like that. And but Sammy, who is holding the money right here, is already rich. And he's going to say later, I'm rich, we're rich, right? But he's already rich. The person who needs the money more is Jesse. But you see Sammy holding the money. And, poverty meets wealth, right? Social systems, social structures, that you often wonder who has the power in the relationship, in this relationship. Is it Sammy who has the power, or is it Jesse? I think Jesse thinks he has a false power. I think he thinks he has power, but I think it's a false power, because look who's holding the money. Jesse has always ridiculed Sammy because of him being rich, right? Already, his parents are rich, but Jesse doesn't pick up money. He doesn't hold the money. You see Sammy holding the money. And then you also see Sammy saying, let's enjoy this. Now remember, this is money that they haven't worked for. They haven't been working for money the whole time of the film, but they definitely haven't worked for this. They found something and they want to enjoy it as if they were enjoying the labor, the fruit of their labor. But they haven't actually worked for something like this, but they want to enjoy it. So Brian is now trying to call Jimmy. Jimmy is not answering the phone, which pushes Brian into more of a pressing frenzy, trying to get Jimmy to come back. Now you look at this scene, this frame here, and you look at the house. We've seen In the film, you see the front of the house, but this calling of Jimmy on the phone is at the back of the house. And it's nice, pristine. You got a nice pool here. You got landscape. You got a nice big balcony. Looks like some sort of gazebo or something. Uh, uh, Patio furniture, whatever you got. It takes time to put all of this together for your life. It's not just you being in a nice neighborhood, upscale, elite, or something like that. But no matter where you live, how you dress the place, how you furnish the place, how you take care of the place, that takes time. That takes over time. But one decision can burn it all down. Brian might as well have burnt his house down. In the same way he burnt that car, he might as well have burnt his house down with that one decision to go into a drug deal. Because even if he wasn't sure enough about the gambling, to turning the 500 into 5,000, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was getting into a drug deal of 100,000 to 300,000, right? And that decision, right? That really, the decision to go into that bar wasn't a good one, right, the first time. But that decision to engage Jimmy and give in to the whims and hastiness of Jimmy, who didn't even have any money and probably don't even own the bar, take out a match and light that match, pour gasoline on the house and light that match, and he has basically burned down his house, Brian. So there's that phone activity again, trying to still get at Jimmy. He can't get him on the phone. So now he's going to push him or press him to now go and look for Jimmy. So shifting the narrative, we have two kids who are shopping with money that they did not earn. And I'm not quite sure you can say they stole the money. They stole the car. Now, if you're not telling anybody about the money that you found in the car, that could still be perceived as stealing. But I feel like they stole the car, not necessarily the money. The money came with the car or something like that. Regardless, it's all wrong. And they're holding up the money, like they're stars. They're taking pictures. They're commenting on the phone that it's a better picture with that phone. They're holding up cash, and they haven't worked a day in their life in order for them to enjoy it. And I think to myself, how are you going to explain that to your parents, that you have all these things, right? They can't lie and say they have jobs, but So Brian has now come to the bar. And I think it's interesting, the positioning of where Jimmy is standing. He's standing in front of a sign that says staff only. And I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's purposeful in the director's point of view, that Jimmy really has been staff the whole time, that he doesn't really own the bar. They have all these conversations outside of an office. And any establishment, especially when you own it, you want to put forth this ego, like you are the big boss around here, and you will wear suits. You will carry yourself in such a way that this is yours. And so you will walk your friends. You will do whatever you have to do to show them what you got. So let me show you your office. There's another thing that you don't see in the movie with Jimmy. He's not really engaging any of the staff, the strippers, right? The people who are doing the little dances. I thought that was interesting, because usually you get to see the person's character and how they are engaging the people around them. And the only character that we see in him is being behind the bar, pouring drinks for Brian, coming up with these little schemes, and that's all we basically see. And we don't see him operating in his environment. This is supposed to be his environment. He's supposed to be a taskmaster. He's supposed to yell at somebody. He's supposed to say all types of things. We don't see the business aspect of it. Now that could be, the creative license of the director, that Jimmy is not that important of a character. But I think if you're going to have a character say he's the boss, or he owns the establishment, then he should operate like he owns it. Being just behind the bar doesn't mean anything. Anybody can do that. But standing in front of staff only and no one beyond this point, basically, just suggests to me that Jimmy really didn't own the bar. He doesn't own the bar. So there's this engagement between the two. Jimmy is not taking it as seriously about losing the money, and really no fault of his own in terms of he didn't jack his own car. But I think his major fault as a character is leaving that money in the car unattended, and I'm shocked that he didn't park his car around at the back of the building. If it's such a beautiful car and it's so fancy or whatever, why is it parked in front of the bar? If anything, that's really for customers. I would have parked that at the back so I could make sure that it's okay, and I would have done all I could to ensure my car was okay. So Jimmy is now pressed. He's feeling his pressing. He goes back to the back room, to the bathroom, to try to regain his composure, because he can't really explain the money away other than to say the truth that someone jacked the car. So he doesn't know how to actually address the situation other than to go back to the back, regain his composure, regain his stance, regain his argument, and see what he comes up with. Whatever comes out of his mouth, that's what he's going to come up with. So now we have an introduction of a gun, and we haven't seen a gun throughout the whole film. The introduction of a gun is the introduction of a solution to the setback. Remember, Jimmy has his own setback. His car was jacked. The money was in the car. He can't use the money as an investment with the drug dealer. So that's his 3 level of setback. And so he never pulled out that gun any other time than now. So he's willing to pull out the gun to resolve the setback dealing with Brian. It's funny that he's willing to use a gun. He's because if you pull something out, you are ready to shoot. And he's willing to leave Brian clueless about the whole situation, use a gun to resolve the situation, to fix his setback. In the same way that it's not the same, but Sammy wanted to fix his setback. So it's interesting how you see the characters now getting into moments where they are pressed in their character development, and they're now wanting to fix their setback. But sometimes you can go too long to the point that you may not be able to fix the setback. So we see Jimmy with a suitcase. And remember when I said that I felt like Jimmy, that the relationship that you see with Jimmy and Brian reminds me of Sammy and Jesse in a way. Remember, it's Jesse who has a bag and wants to leave. So now you see Jimmy with the bag and wants to leave, right? That when they are pressed in their situation, when they feel like they are stuck and can't get out, they pack a bag and they leave. Well, Brian felt the same way when he was in his young adult years, and he ran away. And so it's funny that all these people they're all coming together, and they're all sort of characters that run when things get tough. Coming to the bar is really running. Because he says that in the film he's not really a drinker, but he ends up drinking, right? He doesn't have enough money, but he ends up bringing the $100,000 anyway. You know, there were many times that Brian could have gotten up and walked off, just walked out, paid the bill and walked off. And so he stayed in some ways out of curiosity. He was interested in staying in his own setback out of pure curiosity. And that's why people end up getting too far deep into the thing that they have chosen, and it being too hard for them to get out. So here's the confrontation, and you see Jimmy's hands sort of go to a defensive mode when it comes to Brian. Brian hasn't really been as overt in his personality. He's been basically kind of laid back, needing to be steered a little bit. See, that's what happens when you run away before your time. He didn't have the sustained parental direction. But then you see Jimmy, who was willing to stay with his mom, but she's not giving him parental direction either. So he felt like he got to go. But you see this defensive mode that you need to, Jimmy is essentially saying, calm down. It's not that serious, but it's still Brian's $100,000. That's how you know Jimmy doesn't really care about the situation as much as it seemed like he should care, because it wasn't his $100,000. It was somebody else's investment. There's that introduction of the gun again. So he showed us the gun in the bathroom, but now he's trying to use the gun to continually set Brian back. There is setback as a noun, and then there's setback as a verb, right? As a phrasal verb. And so he went to the defensive position by having his hands up, and now he has transitioned to the gun. And so now this is how he wants to solve the problem. It's interesting, though, that he doesn't immediately shoot Brian. If he's this big time drug dealer type person who is just, bigger than life, why doesn't he shoot him? I understand for the film reasons that he's not going to shoot him, but why doesn't he shoot him? The drug dealer at the end of the movie, when everything comes to a head, he has no problem shooting Brian. He gives Brian and the two teams three choices, and we're going to get into it. And once one choice is made and the other choice is made, he shoots Brian. So Jimmy is a wannabe. Jimmy is really a wannabe character, drug dealer, who doesn't have the character either to be a drug dealer or to be a fake boss or to be a fake business owner. Jimmy is really one of those types of people that snake their way into your life because they're really looking for something else, and they see you as the person that they can mark and get it from. Jimmy always planned to leave. That suitcase that we see him holding in the previous frames, that's not something that suddenly comes to mind as a result of being pressed because he lost the money. That is something that I believe he had planned. When Brian looks at the suitcase and looks at the fact that he has tickets, that's something that's already been planned. Jimmy is just basically a con artist. That bar that he says he owns, it probably belongs to somebody else, like a family member, and he was just tending the bar, and the family member is out of town or something like that. And so using the gun is a solution to resolve and fix the setback that Jimmy still caused. So now we have Brian addressing Jimmy. He's surprised by the gun, of course, and he's wondering how it got to where it got to. But one of the questions that I told you about earlier that he poses is, how do you give $100,000 to people you don't know? And something in Brian should have pulled him in that understanding of himself, because usually when you're saying things about somebody, it's really projection, and that you're really saying it about yourself. How can you give $100,000 to people you do not know? And remember, as much as Jimmy is a wannabe drug dealer, he's still a member of a larger system for which Brian has no clue. Brian only knows the system of work. Jimmy does not work. And so he does not know that system. Jimmy is a con, and he only knows the conning system. And so Brian mixing in with the con system is a major problem, because he's navigating blind or blindly. He's navigating with some kind of false confidence that it doesn't matter whether I move from this system to the next, I can navigate it. But that's not true. You could say the same if we look at a parallel between with from this particular scene, or these attitudes expressed within the scene, to just industry. You move from one industry to the next. Well, you need industry specific knowledge, especially if you're going to go up the corporate ladder. You don't assume that just because you did what you did over here in this area, this industry, that you can translate it also in the next. There are skills that you can bring to either area. There are transferable skills, right? You need to know how to write anyway, write reports, things like that, research, etc. But there's industry specific knowledge and skill sets that you have to have before you get into this new area. And this gun that you see that is pointing towards, that Jimmy is pointing towards Brian, is one part of a larger system that Brian is later going to realize was the wrong thing to engage, because it is this part right here doesn't kill him right now, but it is a warning of when he will die in the end. And this is where he's saying, where he's asking that question: how do you give $100,000 to people you don't know? And he's seething. It's something that is coming out of Brian that is forcing us to really pay attention to his face, his teeth, his nose, his eyes. We couldn't see that throughout the whole, majority of the film. Very emotionless, like the child that he was at the back of the car, and didn't really show much emotion. But now that the fact that he's about to lose everything, that $100,000, and likely his family, is his personality is coming out, his character. And you have to wonder, is this his real character? I mean, he asked a great question: how do you give $100,000 to people you don't know? But he didn't have enough wherewithal to ask that question before he gave it. So he's a hasty person. He makes hasty decisions. He doesn't think things through. He thinks after the fact. He thinks everything would just work out. He trusts too much. To give Jimmy $100,000 and not know Jimmy, let alone who Jimmy represents and who Jimmy is a part of, is hasty. It's just hasty. It's just good old-fashioned hastiness. And so, is this his real character? Because remember, he ran away when he was a child. It looks like he tried to go down the right road when he was trying to find jobs after his initial layoff. But then he engages Jimmy, and it takes him down a completely different path. So they engage in a fight, right, of course. And Jimmy is going to die. And it's not that Brian kills him, it's that the fight takes them both to the ground, and Jimmy hits his head. And Jimmy is Brian is the one who still initiates the fight. So if we were in criminal court or something, Brian would be accused of starting the fight. He starts the fight by trying to take the gun. Now that's an interesting thing, that Jimmy is trying to use the gun to solve his setback. Brian is basically saying that the gun is not going to solve the setback. I'm going to fight you. And I think that the fight is actually going to solve the setback. I'm serious about this thing. I'm so serious. I don't need a gun to shoot you or kill you. I can just fight you myself. So they get into a tussle. They fall backwards. Jimmy hits his head. He's bleeding from his head, and he dies. And so we see this image of Jimmy dead with the gun in front of him, with blood coming out of his head, fully dressed, right? And this is a very interesting image. But the most important part of this image is that there is nothing in Brian that has sympathy for this dead man other than to cover up the situation. So now Brian is going to get into a cover-up. He's contemplating, he's thinking, he got blood on his hands, he's surprised. And like I said, you almost have to wonder, is this his character? Is this who he is as a person? We don't have any background on any violent tendencies. This may be truly in the heat of the moment, in the passion of the moment. But remember, there was a good span of time that Brian was trying to contact Jimmy to see what's going on. So that gave Brian a lot of time to think about what kind of response he was going to do. I'm not saying he was thinking that he was going to kill Jimmy, but how many times have we said, I will kill you, right? And then find ourselves acting that out, because your body follows your mind, whatever you're thinking about. And so this is blood on his hands. This changes the game. The setback has become so bad that it changes his psyche. He gets into a different type of thinking after this death. Of course, he smokes a cigarette. There's his ring that he's thinking about, right? And then he faces the mirror. He cries. It bothers him. He didn't think that it would go this far. Surely two grown men can have a conversation about what went wrong with the deal. This is a clear frame concerning his realization. The cry is that fearful, I don't want to be caught cry. The second cry I feel is the one, how am I going to work this? I can't just leave out of here. How am I going to fix this? So the way he fixes it is to lock the doors, begin the process of addressing the setback. So Jimmy's death has become the next setback for him that he's going to have to overcome. And the only way that he feels like he can overcome this immediate setback is to clean up. So we have the cleaning materials, the gloves, the brush, the bleach, and all these other colorful materials that he's going to have to use to clean up. And so he gets on his knees to clean up this setback. And he really doesn't have any other choice but to clean it. He can't really leave. There's fingerprints everywhere. Of course, he's still a bar customer. He can make the point that he can easily make the point that he found Jimmy that way, but there's nobody else in the bar. So then how would he sort of explain that? But he's cleaning up his setback. Then he discovers the drugs. And I've never quite understood why Jimmy had the drugs with him. I understand Jimmy wanting to use other people's money to fund his investment. That's business today, and rich people usually do that anyway. But I never understood why he had the drugs. So now to solve the other part of the setback, since he is already dead, we have Brian now carrying his setback. And that's very interesting. that Brian is carrying it. This is the person who got him into the drug situation. This is the person who lost the money. This is the person who was about to skip out on him. And this is the person who challenged him with a gun. And this is the person that he also ended up killing by accident. And so now he is bearing the load of the setback. And what that basically means is he's bearing the load of the decision making that led up to him now carrying Jimmy out. Now think about this picture, sort of like it's either in contrast to or in comparison to the two teenagers set against that sort of field that we saw, all weeds and dilapidated housing. It's just all the chaos, and we kind of see this at the back of this visual. Trash bags, I think those are crates, some kind of little wicker shelf or something like that. It's just all chaos. Nothing is put together. Nothing is dressed. Like I said somewhere in the beginning, that whatever house you buy, you want to make sure that you set it up, you furnish it, you dress it, it's organized, things like that. There's no organization here, right? It's all just a mess. But do think about this. This is Brian carrying his setback, and it is a accumulation of decisions that led up to him now carrying his setback. So he's putting him in the car. He's putting his setback in the car, in the trunk of the car. Then he is approached by a homeless man. And the homeless man, he's begging him for money. And he could be a foreshadowing of Brian becoming homeless as a result of losing a house. So in terms of narrative structure, this may distract us, because we could all think to ourselves, we could all become that one person, right, who is homeless. So this could be to distract us. He's not necessarily a true witness, because he doesn't really care about the fact that he just put Jimmy in the car. He may not have seen it, but he wants something from Brian that Brian can give, which is money. And Brian basically gives him the money and tells him to get out of here. But I think about his presence in the film and what it means and how many different angles. And, he is a reflection of perpetual setback if he doesn't make a change in his life, this homeless person. That means that if we don't make changes in our life, we would be a perpetual, we would live in perpetual setback. There's nothing in this man that says, I need to get back on my feet and work. In the same way that you see the mother. The mother is really homeless, Jesse's mother. Yes, she's living in a place, but she has no job, and the son is the one who goes out and gets money by stealing. But she may be emotionally, psychologically homeless if her son is providing the finances, right? But if she doesn't have a job, eventually she's going to become homeless. So if you look at this homeless man and you place him on a stick as a way to visualize what could be, what is and what could be, and look at him as a sign of what your future could be if you don't work through your setback. And I say, to overcome setback, you need to go through correction. So that means there's something in your understanding that you missed and that you need to be corrected for. And so this image is, I wish I could stay on this for longer, but this image is everything. This image of the homeless man is everything, because many of the characters here are sort of just on the brink of homelessness, or homeless, or struggling emotionally, or whatever. Because you can be emotionally homeless, you can be psychologically homeless, you can be financially homeless. So I want to go on ahead and keep going, but this image here is something that gives us pause. So Brian is in the car. He's crying. Remember, Justin Donnelly, the director, always does these types of camera shots, but he's looking at his ring. So that means he took off his ring, I guess, in the idea that he would have to give up his wife, because he doesn't have the money, and if he doesn't have the money, he can't take care of his wife, and if his wife feels like he can't take care of her, she's going to leave. And so then this image is also everything. So I wonder then if his mother left his father after the bankruptcy court, or who left whom. Either way, you cry over issues that are next to you emotionally, that you are used to, that you are triggered some kind of way. You don't just cry just to cry. If he felt that the situation could be resolved, he wouldn't be sitting in a car crying. So somewhere he feels like the issue can't be resolved. So instead of his wife leaving him, he'll just go on ahead and leave her by taking off the ring. But this is where he's in a car, he's thinking, looking at the ring, contemplating it. What will be the next strategy? He doesn't have the money, right? He's in another car. He doesn't have the same car he had before. It's Jimmy's car, and we don't know if Jimmy even, bought that car, right? It's Jimmy, I think it's a rental or something like that. So here's that sort of angle again. Here's a light coming in. He's feeling in darkness with eyes closed, and then there's a police officer with a flashlight, and you can look at the light coming in. Usually when you see light coming in, light represents instruction. Light represents instruction, right? And so that's why you never want to sit completely in the dark, because if you sit in the dark, you don't see the light, and the light will guide you out of where you are, and the way out of setback is by obeying an instruction. And I always say that in all of my audios on this idea of overcoming setback, that the way out of setback is by you obeying instruction. So if you think about the platoon leader who commands his platoon forward march, right? If they don't forward march, if the platoon does not forward march, then they don't advance. They don't move forward. But if the platoon forward marches, then they advance, they move forward. And so when you are in setback, you need the instruction to move you out. You have missed an opportunity. You have received punishment. The pain is an instruction, and then you keep going after that. But you cannot operate without instruction to move forward. That overcoming setback requires correction, but the way out of setback is by obeying an instruction. And correction correction is a form of instruction. So the light coming in is light coming into the situation. No, Brian is not going to confess that he just killed somebody. No, he's not going to confess that he gave his money to a drug dealer and he was engaging in drug dealing, No, he's not going to confess anything, but there's light in the situation that we could call attention to that is very important for us to understand. So the cop and Brian had their own interaction. He told Brian to get out of the car, and they looked at the back of the car, and the cop was just noting issues with rental agencies selling bad cars and things like that. And he was basically encouraging Brian to not let the rental agency take advantage of him. Brian says, okay, I'll be sure not to do that. And then now he is sitting in his car, smoking a cigarette. It's kind of just a little bit smoky, and he's contemplating. So now we see what that opening scene was about. We are now in this field, dump or something like that, or in the mountains, and we see a shovel, we see a gasoline container, and we see other things, and then we see also the trunk opened. And so Brian is thinking about what he should do, what he can do, and I don't know where he got the shovel from, or the gasoline can, but it could have been in the bar. I don't know, but that's interesting. We don't see him going to the store and retrieving these items, but Brian is bothered by the situation. And he thinks to himself, the only way to solve this setback on this situation is to bury. So now Brian is burying Jimmy. So he's putting the dirt on him. So remember, this is the same man that we saw at the beginning in his element, feeling powerful as a director of sales, to now he's in a different element with different consequences, and he is now responsible for a murder. And that's what happens when we engage distractions, when we stay too far in a setback. We end up living in a state of mind that is hard to get out of. You know, think about the person who has been to prison or jail, and think about how that person keeps going back and forth into jail. And I think to myself, at what point are you going to be tired of going back and forth into jail? So they are, I don't know if they are capable of being corrected, because here they are actually in a literal correctional facility, and they're missing instruction again, and they're not being corrected to the point that they get out and they do exactly the same thing. Well, it goes back to what Sammy was telling Jimmy. You got to have a plan. That going off and running away and leaving, and that's not a plan. Trying to find another city or something like that, that's not a plan. That Brian didn't have a plan, so Jimmy planned Brian's life, and you see the result of it right now, that Brian is forced to bury Jimmy. So now we see the gas can, the gas container that he's going to pour it in there. He takes a cigarette, there's some smoke, and he's going to chunk it into the car. And now we see why the car is afire or lit. And so now Brian has turned his back towards the fire. He can't even watch it. The interesting thing here is that the little fires, there are little fires along the way. There's a smoking, and then there's a smoking in the car. And then somehow these little fires have now led up to this big fire here. And that there's really no point of return. Even though he has set the car afire, there's no point of return here. And I'm not quite sure you can resolve this issue, right? It is here where he gets a call from his wife. So he's on the phone. He's always on that phone. He's on the phone. And he gets the call from his wife asking about how everything's going, while he has just buried Jimmy and set the car afire. And there's nothing in him that suggests that this was wrong to do, right? Or he's not bothered by it. So he has returned to his sort of state of mind that's basically dull, not sharp anymore, right? He's returned to that young boy in the car who has a blank face, right? And so he's basically talking to his wife out of some robotic way of engagement. There's not a lot of emotions. There's not a lot of, thinking about it. It's just him talking to his wife. I wonder, when I look at Brian in this visual, I wonder just how much he is thinking, just how much his character has changed, just how much the life he has built is about to go up in flames. And it's such a sad thing when we often make decisions out of haste, especially when we are persuaded by this ideal that this decision is the decision that we need to make. But there's always an alternative. And the alternative, before we get into trouble, is essentially to walk away. That if we can perceive the situation as it really is and see it for what it really is, I don't think we would engage as much. But we stay too long because we are curious. As I noted in previous audios, we're curious about it, and that's what sort of pulls us in and keeps us in. When you think about Brian baited himself as well. He baited himself into this belief that he can, whatever comes his way, he can handle it, despite the situation coming from a different context. It doesn't matter. He's going to take all of his knowledge and skills and apply it to this to any context, and I know it's going to work. So when you think about Brian, you almost have to wonder why he got fired, because he really didn't display much negotiation skills. And Brian sort of reminds you of that person who accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, but never really self-reflect. If you're thinking about his sales job, right, as a director of sales, Brian just may be a good salesperson. He just may be a good person who is an account manager, but he may not have had any sort of conflicts when it came to negotiation, that he may not be a good negotiator, because he shouldn't be in this situation now. If he negotiated well with Jimmy and really stood his ground when he said, I don't have it to do, I don't have it to give, I don't have the money, and just stood his ground and supported his own argument, he wouldn't be in this situation. So he lacked the negotiation skills to keep him out of this situation. When you think about Sammy and Jesse, it's Jesse who is always sort of scolding and mocking Sammy. And so he is the better negotiator in their friendship, because he's the one who convinced Sammy that jacking cars is good, even though Sammy is the one who said jacking cars is wrong. It's at the end that Sammy agrees with Jesse, because of the threat of Jesse leaving, that he says, okay, jacking is good, you're going to need a car, right? And Jesse says, I want to leave clean, but then he ends up giving in. So this thing about Setback really requires that you negotiate your distractions, that you negotiate conflicts and problems and face them head on, because if you don't, it's down the road. It's always down the road. And you're going to run into these situations to the point that you're going to get off the path that you were initially set onto some completely. This is a completely different path. This is the epitome of what will happen when you make the wrong decisions, when you perpetuate your setback and you go too far to the point that you can't get out of. He can't get out of this. Even if he's setting fire to the car, it's going to be linked to him some kind of way. The drug dealers didn't have to find them. The cops were going to find them. And so this is the epitome of that. So he's talking to his wife. The child is laying in the bed, and the wife has she's just oblivious. She wouldn't think that there was a problem anyway. And remember, all this time, um, Brian never told his wife that he lost his job. And that was the way out of temptation into all this stuff that he's doing. That had he told his wife, like I said earlier, had he told his wife that he lost his job, drove home, drove into the driveway, got out of the car, opened the door, brought his box and briefcase, and the box could serve as a visual aid, and told her, they might have had a fight, they might have had struggles, things like that, but he wouldn't be standing in front of a car that he just set afire, and he wouldn't be standing after killing somebody and burying them. So it's interesting that in your setback, you don't always know, you don't always tell people what's going on. This is a person that he's married to, that he sleeps with in a bed, that he has sex with, but he can't tell her that he lost his job. So there, I can't blame the woman, because this is something that he decided to do. But it is interesting to think about that he can't tell his wife that he lost the job. Irrespective of all the flashbacks he has back to his childhood, that's still something to note, that if you're going through a setback, not everybody gonna always understand, but you should still be able to tell the person that you are sleeping with that you lost your job. So that's something I want you to think about too. So we're back to this narrative with the twins, with the teens, and so they're just giving money like there's no tomorrow, which is going to be true for one of them, and as if they earned it and it's okay to give. They're being sort of it's interesting. They're kind of being a little bit of a philanthropist, right? Remember the $25,000 that the wife is so concerned about with the Cancer Society, and Brian is so preoccupied about that $25,000, and we have lost that. He is no longer preoccupied about that anymore. But they're kind of being the same way. They're kind of maintaining appearances, just like Brian was maintaining appearances. They're not rich for real, except for Sammy. But his family is, his parents are rich. But they're not really rich for real, but they're maintaining the appearance that they are. In the same way that Brian was maintaining the appearance that he was still fine, even though he just lost his job. That he still had the same wealth or whatever, even though he just lost his job. So I thought this is very interesting. Then they get into the limo that they have purchased, and I wonder how they did that with their young age, but they have purchased a limo. And then you see Sammy, who is already rich, saying, "We're rich." And they're yelling, and they're laughing and everything, and it's not even their true money. So we see now Brian sneaking into a car lot or something. I forget what it's called. He found the car, and he's trying to see if that money is in the car. Of course, it's not going to be. And then there's a phone call, and Jesse answers the phone, which reveals to Brian who they are. And this is the picture. This is Brian saying, "I will find you." So Brian knows now who were the instigators of the botched drug deal, the setback. That on their end, they created a setback for which Brian now has to try to recover. So they show up at Brian's door, right? At a meeting. You see Brian now holding a gun in the back. If you see behind his back in the jeans, I didn't catch it before, but I catch it now. He has put back on his ring, so he still has his ring on. And the two young men are just kind of scared. No, the color scheme is kind of weird here. They're all in gray and black. I don't know what to make of that. That just could be a man thing, with the exception of jeans. So I don't know. So Brian opens the suitcase, the briefcase, which remember is a work case, and there's only it's not the same $100,000. They have spent so much money of it. And so if I'm not mistaken, there's only $45,000 left, or it's either 55 or 45,000. So he tells the men what happened. He asks the young men what happened to the money, and they're quiet. And Jesse is, kind of defiant. Jesse reminds you of somebody you would see in one of those little Broadway shows, where he's I forget the name of the Broadway show, where he's fighting with other people his age. I can't think of it right now, but he's asking them what happened to it, and they refuse, basically to tell him, and then he keeps pulling that out of them. So now we see Brian using the gun. Now he took it out of his pocket and laid it on the briefcase, but that's for intimidation, right? When Jimmy pulled out a gun while he was in the bathroom, it was like maybe triggering for him, I don't know. But then when he came out and he pulled a gun out on Brian, it was to keep him back, to set him back. Here, this is a little bit of an intimidation. It's sort of like a man thing as well. And he's showing them, Brian is not going to kill them. No way he's going to kill them, but it's to show him that he means business or something like that. So there's a little bit of a ominous music that sort of comes along these three cars. These three cars actually are the drug dealers, and so they have located Brian and where he lives. And again, we see this shot of them, how important they are, so coordinated. Remember, this is the system. This is the system that Brian doesn't know anything about, that they have been tracking. We will discover at the end. That they have been tracking Brian the whole time, and the two teenagers and Jimmy. So they have really known about the whole thing. After the botched drug deal, they have known about all of the different events the whole time. And this is the system. Now, it's not a ton of cars, but you see how coordinated they are, how strategic they are. They've been driving around. When we get to the drug dealer, the head drug dealer, he basically tells us that he's been made a fool of, and that these two teens have been riding around with my money, and so that it's been clear the whole time. When you look at this frame, I want you to think about that question that Brian proposed or offered to Jimmy in the bar.